The energy in the studio was already restless before Denzel Washington took his seat across from Bill Maher. Not because the audience expected anything unusual, but because there had been a tension building for days on social media after Maher had made pointed remarks about Hollywood's moral grandstanding, indirectly referencing Denzel without naming him. And so when the moment finally arrived, it carried with it the weight of anticipation. Like a storm waiting to break over to men who both commanded attention, but in wildly different ways, built with his biting cynicism and needling provocations. Denzel with his composed dignity and steely clarity and, though their greeting was polite, even warm, there was an undercurrent of intellectual friction that surfaced almost immediately as Maher pivoted from small talk about films into heavier terrain, questioning the usefulness of celebrity activism, dismissing it as virtue theater, and when he casually included Denzel in his example, noting the actor's public comments on race, policing, and spiritual grounding, the shift was subtle, but visible, Denzel leaning forward slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to signal alertness without aggression, and as Maher chuckled and said, "You know, Denzel, for someone who plays tough guys, you sure preach a lot," the audience offered. A nervous laugh, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. And Denzel, measured as ever, responded, "Maybe I just play them well because I've been tough when it counted." And Maher, sensing resistance, doubled down, asking if Denzel thought it was his place to educate the public, which opened the floodgates to an uncomfortable exchange where Denzel, now visibly irritated but still composed, spoke firmly about the responsibility of having a platform not to speak for others, but to be unafraid to say what matters when it matters. And Maher, with a half-grin, said, "See, this is the problem. I bring you here to talk, and you come here to preach." And that was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a thread snapping beneath too much pressure. Because Denzel paused, sat back in his chair, and said, "You invited me to talk, just not to say anything you don't already agree with." And the silence that followed was deafening, the kind of silence that demands a response. But Maher, caught between his own persona and the reality of a guest who wouldn't be bullied by sarcasm, smirked and said, "So now you're the martyr?" To which Denzel stood, calmly removed his microphone, and before walking off, said directly into the camera, "When real conversation turns into mockery, I leave the room," and exited without another word, leaving the host, crew, and live audience frozen in a mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration, because the act wasn't dramatic. It was powerful in its precision, and in the hours that followed, clips of the moment dominated every platform, racking up millions of views with commentators and celebrities weighing in, most praising Denzel's refusal to be caricatured, while Maher's defenders insisted it was just his usual brand of provocation. But the public saw the difference, saw the line that had been crossed. And it wasn't about disagreement, it was about dismissiveness. And for many, Denzel's quiet walkout wasn't just a refusal to argue. It was a rejection of the entire premise that nuance must be sacrificed for the sake of entertainment. And in walking away, he didn't retreat, he redefined what it meant to take a stand. And in the weeks that followed, he never addressed the incident again, never issued a follow-up. Because when the moment speaks for itself, anything more only dulls its edge. The aftermath of Denzel Washington's quiet yet unmistakable departure from Bill Maher's show wasn't just a trending topic, it became a cultural moment dissected, with a fervor usually reserved for political scandals and award show blunders. And while Maher returned to his monologue in the following episode, with a few self-deprecating remarks and a barely concealed attempt to frame Denzel's exit as Hollywood sensitivity, the world outside the studio saw it differently, because in the clip that circulated endlessly, what stood out wasn't just the words, but the body language, the stillness in Denzel's voice, the unshaken eye contact, the deliberate calm, with which he dismantled the tone of the conversation without ever needing to raise his voice or curse or make it about himself. It was a lesson in presence. And suddenly, people across all spectrums of opinion were talking about something that went beyond celebrity, beyond race, beyond politics. They were talking about how we listen, and more importantly, how we don't. And as the commentary rolled in from all corners of media, with writers drawing comparisons to the likes of James Baldwin or Maya Angelou or even Al-Anat for style. But for the principle of refusing to play a game when the rules are built to belittle, Denzel was spotted only once publicly, quietly leaving a community event at a charter school in Compton, where, according to a leaked phone video, he told a group of young men, "You don't have to match their noise to make your point. Just let your truth stand." In that clip, though only 30 seconds, went just as viral, cementing the sense that what had happened on Maher's show was more than a disagreement. It was a refusal to be extracted from and used for a narrative someone else had already written. And inside the industry, things stirred more deeply than the public realized, because producers and executives who had previously considered Denzel safe or respectable were now reevaluating whether he'd become too difficult or too principled for mainstream talk show formats, which said more about them than about him. And meanwhile, offers flooded in from other networks, many of whom wanted Denzel not just as a guest, but as a collaborator, a co-producer, a voice behind something authentic and unfiltered. And though he declined most of them, he reportedly took a meeting with a nonprofit journalism collective, looking to create a platform where honest conversations could happen without ratings pressure, and that move alone spoke volumes. Because while Maher continued to mock the walkout generation, claiming that people like Denzel can't take heat, what he failed to understand, or maybe understood too well, was that Denzel hadn't walked out because of heat, but because the kitchen had stopped cooking truth and was just burning anything it didn't like the taste of. And weeks later, during an acceptance speech at a small private award ceremony for lifetime service to arts and activism, Denzel touched on the subject for the first and only time since that night, saying, "Respect doesn't come from agreement, it comes from listening. And if you won't give me that, you don't get the rest of me either." And those words echoed louder than any fight or clapback, because they were rooted in clarity. And clarity doesn't beg to be heard. It simply exists until the noise fades away. And perhaps that was the real takeaway, not that Denzel silenced Bill Maher or proved anything to the internet, but that he walked away on his terms, left behind a moment that belonged to no one else. And in doing so, reminded a watching world that sometimes the most powerful sentence is the one you end with your feet.